British India, or British Raj, is the British colonial empire in the Indian subcontinent between 1858 and 1947. It was considered as the jewel of the crown of the entire British Empire. British India was established after the suppression of the rebellion of 1857 by converting the previous possessions of the British East India Company into a crown colony. But how exactly did that happen from the Mughal Empire until now in the next few minutes?
The Mughal Empire was an early modern empire in South Asia. For some 2 centuries, the empire stretched from the outer fringes to the Indus Basin in the west, northern Afghanistan in the northwest, and Kashmir in the north, to the highlands of the present day, Assam and Bangladesh in the east, and the uplands of the Deccan Plateau in South India. The Mughal Empire ruled most of India and Pakistan in the 16th and 17th centuries, consolidated Islam in South Asia, and spread Muslim arts and culture as well as the faith. The Mongols were Muslims who ruled the country with a large Hindu majority. However, for much of their empire, they allowed Hindus to reach senior government or military positions. The Mongols brought many changes to India. They centralized government that brought together many smaller kingdoms. They delegated government with respect for human rights, Persian art and culture, Persian language, mixed with Arabic and Hindi to create Urdu, periods of great religious tolerance, a style of architecture, for example the Taj Mahal, and a system of education that took account of people's needs and culture. The Marathas, now sometimes called Maharashtrians, are an Indic people speakers of the Marathi language. The boundaries of the modern Indian state of Maharashtra were drawn so as to include all majority Marathi-speaking areas. The Marathi language emerged 1,000 years ago, but the Maratha Empire took shape only after 1674. Its leaders contended with the Mughal Empire and contributed to its downfall. They created a loosely knit but dynamic political system that grew within the frame of the Mughal imperial power, while reducing it to a shadow of its former self. Maratha governors ruled the great cities of Agra and Delhi, and it was from them that the British wrested control of North India in 1803 to 1806. The residual Maratha states still put up a fierce resistance before succumbing to the new British Empire in 1818. The East India Company was initially created in 1600 to serve as a trading body for English merchants, specifically to participate in the East Indian spice trade. It later added such items as cotton, silk, indigo, salt, pepper, tea and opium to its wares, and also participated in the slave trade. The company eventually became involved in politics and acted as an agent of British imperialism in India from the early 17th to the mid-18th. Their merchants were frequently involved in clashes with the Dutch competitors in the Indian Ocean, perhaps seeing the futility of trade wars in distant waters. The British in any case decided to explore possibilities of a permanent settlement on the Indian mainland. One prompted the British government to begin a diplomatic initiative. In 1650, Sir Thomas Roe was commissioned by James I to seek out the Mongol Emperor Jahangir, who ruled 17% of the subcontinent. The purpose of this mission was to conclude a trade agreement that would give the British East India Company exclusive rights to settle in Surat and other areas, and to set up continent. In return, the company offered to supply the emperor with goods and luxury items from Europe.
First of all, it is important to note that there are different perspectives on the time of India as a colony. Some seeing it as exploitations, while others describe it as a time when India was developed. The rule of the British on the Indian subcontinent is certainly the most controversial and hotly debated aspect in the history of British Empire. The admirers of British rule point to the economic developments or the fact that India became the center of the world politics, which gained a great deal of influence. There are also critics who say, for example, that all these advantages went to a very small British ruling class and that the majority of Indians benefited little from them. Most of the Indians were poor and were oppressed by their kings before the British came, and that British rule was less harsh for ordinary Indians than the rule of Indian rulers. So, according to them, it made no difference since they were being suppressed anyway. Another relevant reason for the complex situation is that India was very different from the other territories of the British Empire. North America and Australia, for example, were not as densely populated as India, and their populations were less economically developed than Britain. India, on the other hand, had a huge population and was developed as Britain was in the 17th century when the British arrived. At first, there were only rebels who fought against the British in order to achieve an independent state. This will for independence grew over time. Under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, there was active but non-violent resistance to British rule in the interwar period. In 1919 and 1920, Gandhi had promoted action to preserve the caliphate, which led to the dissociation of the Muslim League, which tended to be secular at the time, with Ali Jinnah at its head. Within the Indian National Congress at such times, particularly under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose in the late 1930s, there were directional disputes over the use of force against British law. After the end of the Second World War, hostilities escalated between Hindus and Muslims. And finally, Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, the leaders of the Indian National Congress, agreed to the partition of India with the separation of the Muslim territories into a new political entity called Pakistan, as demanded by the Muslim League. In 1947, Pakistan and India were separated in this manner. The boundary line in the middle of the two states was drawn up with the help of the British civil servant Cyril Radcliffe and literally demonstrated to the public only at the last minute before the act of partition. Afterwards, violence erupted and a hasty mass exodus of Hindus from Pakistan and Muslims from India took place, during which more than 1 million people lost their lives. Mahatma Gandhi was shot by a fanatical Hindu on January 30, 1948. Gradually, the Indian princely states, not voluntarily at times, joined either India or Pakistan. The Nizam of Hyderabad tried to preserve his country's independence, but nevertheless established secret ties with Pakistan. For the time being, King George VI of Great Britain remained India's head of state. The last viceroy, Louis Mountbatten, was the king's representative and governors-general for a transitional period until 1948, after which C. Rajagopalachari was the first native Indian to hold this office until the proclamation of the Republic in 1950. The office of the first head of government was taken over by Jawaharlal Nehru, who had been appointed by Gandhi. West and East Pakistan were created. Today, East Pakistan is known as Bangladesh. Overall, a partition of India was necessary because the fights between Hindus and Muslims were severe. In addition to Nehru, Ali Jinnah, Subhash Chandra Bose, and of course Mahatma Gandhi, it was India's revolutionary fighters who sacrificed their lives for the country. They heated up the population, for example, with hunger strikes and targeted attacks on the British. The fact that there were now two states, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and the Secular Republic of India, averted further disputes at the expense of millions of deaths. Through their ideas of ruling, the British changed India greatly, which is not surprising because of the long period of time. First the Mughals, then the Marathas ruled on Indian soil before they were ousted by the British. But what influence did the colonial period have on India today? The language was greatly influenced by the study of the British. There are many English words in the Indian languages such as Hindi in modern times. Moreover, English is the second official language of India. It can also be argued that when the British came, they found a more or less united India, but when they left a smaller and divided country behind. However, this can also be observed otherwise. as India was not united at that time. This means that the British strengthened the national thought and patriotism. This common enemy forced Indians to unite in order to become independent. The conflicts between Hindus and Muslims were so great that partition was only a matter of time. Today, there are about 200 million Muslims living in India, who are a minority compared to the Hindus. Still, a huge population of India is Muslim. The greatest aspect caused by the British is that they exploited India, which can be partly explained as correct. However, they also provided development, such as the constructions of railways. The most popular sport in India is cricket, which has its roots in England. Nevertheless, experts agree that the economy would be better off without colonization. Taxes for the farmers also widened the gap between the rich and poor in the country, which is still evident today. So overall, no matter how you look at colonization, if the British had not come, we would definitely be looking at a different India.